All right. My name is Patrick Rooney, and welcome to the Old School Podcast. And we are at oldschoolus.com. And we are all about natural health, success, and freedom. Those are the kind of the passions of my life, and they pretty much always have been. And they all kind of fit together in a funny way. So um, today we're going to talk with a gentleman named Richard Emmons. And Richard is the publisher and editor of the Oregon Eagle. We're going to talk about what he's doing with the paper, which a paper that I love here in the area. And also we're going to talk about, specifically, we're going to dig into the so-called homeless issue. And it's hot. It's been hot in Grants Pass for a long time, and it's still hot. And a lot of people think it's really not being dealt with properly. So we want to kind of shine the light on that. So here we go. Good morning, Richard. How are you?
I'm doing great, Patrick. Great to be here.
Yeah, I've been wanting to interview you for a long time because I've been starting to, reading your paper. It used to be, I believe, just for, was it Josephine County and Jackson County, and now it's expanded, right?
Yeah, it began as the Josephine County Eagle, and
Right.
we did that for about 3 years, and then realized that we really share common concerns with Jackson County and Curry County and other counties. So we relaunched as the Oregon Eagle with the Rogue Valley edition, and we had plans to do a statewide edition as well.
Excellent. And I know that you send the paper out, you kind of distribute it essentially free. Many places, I guess you have distribution points all over the place. And then people can also get a subscription to that as well and they get, I guess they get the benefit of knowing they're helping out, but they also get, I think, a few little goodies as well, as far as maybe access and things like that.
Yeah, we have a forum that if they choose to, that we can get in there and discuss the issues. For most people, they want to make sure they get it each time it comes out and it gets mailed to their home.
Yes.
And they do support the cause because each person that subscribes is also helping others to get it that they don't pay. And
that's right.
Yep.
That's right. One of the things that fascinated me about what you're doing, first of all, I like your approach. It sounds like kind of a conservative libertarian type of approach to less government, more responsibility, that kind of thing. And you're not like a flame-throwing kind of guy. You don't come across that way. And, I guess there's a place for every kind of personality. And sometimes someone like Alex Jones or somebody is a flame-throwing personality, and he gets attention. And actually, I think a lot of things he said have been proven out to be true, which kind of shocked a lot of us. But I like the fact that you're, come across as a regular person. I also like the fact that you have put something together that is sustaining itself. And a lot of times people want to be activists and they want to do something, but they kind of burn themselves out right away. They go through their money or whatever it is. Somehow you've been able to have something going that sustains itself. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, first of all, my background is that I had an accounting degree, a business degree. I was a chief financial officer for 15 years. And so I have the numbers down. My wife and I, it's really a mom and pop operation for the most part. And we each have different skill sets. She's a graphic designer. She's very creative, excellent customer service. Couldn't do it without her. I also have a copy editor that I've known for 30 years, and he's excellent, and he reads every article before it goes into print.
Got to have a good editor.
You've got to have a good editor, and he's somebody that I trust, and he might say, this column isn't quite right for our audience, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I've also written a couple of books. A background as marketing consultant, and I've done door-to-door selling for residential and for business over my career, and never was on the high school newspaper, didn't do it in college, didn't get a journalism degree, but I do know how to write, and I do have an opinion. And as you say, I try to be persuasive, and rather than force my ideas onto somebody. I know some people might think differently, but for the most part, in my experience, you want to track that middle section. Let's just say round numbers, there's 10% that are super engaged, and they can be on the more conservative side and on the progressive side, you know.
Right.
But that middle 80%, or maybe it's 60%, somewhere in there,
Mhm.
you need to be persuasive. So you want to be able to speak and write in a way that's clear, concise, and compelling. And knowing that if you do have a more freedom-minded worldview, conservative, Christian, wanting to be persuasive, then you can't make people do things. It's the
No.
opposite progressive mindset that says, we know best, we're going to take your money as a taxpayer and we're going to spend your money on programs that can make the world a better place.
Right.
And our view is that families and businesses can spend their own money better than government employees located in Salem or even locally.
I love this whole concept, and especially in today's world, we've got the kind of so-called mainstream media kind of dominating everything that goes on. And in this state, every state has one or two big cities that kind of dominate everything. You got Salem and Portland here, and it's easy to just see things in the news, and they can kind of mold. I mean, look at uh, Vice President Harris right now. She was a complete failure as a border czar and didn't even show up. Kind of, I'm not trying to make fun of her, but she was kind of a laughing stock, and the media has turned her into, Mother Teresa or something. So and the same thing I'm sure happens here. So it's really nice to see a balance here, and we're not just going to take, what's coming to us from the mainstream media.
I totally agree. And, to Mother Teresa's credit, she did do press conferences. She did answer questions from
Yeah,
reporters.
right.
And I say that because being in the news business now, I really wish that our elected officials would have more press conferences,
Yes.
whether it's on the homeless situation, where you have the mayor or the city council or county commissioners or the governor here in Oregon. Just don't do traditional press conferences where on a regular basis, members of the press can ask questions, and the elected official has to defend what they've done or defend what they have chosen not to do.
Right. And if they can get away with it, though, right? If you can if you can run a campaign from your basement or something like that, and people let you do it, if you can have so many number of days where there's no press conference and there's not enough of a public outcry, right? Aren't they going to keep doing it if they really don't want to be accountable?
Yes. I mean, if they can get away with it, I think more and more people are getting their news from corporate, non-legacy media sources. I mean, obviously, which
That's very
includes,
nice.
like your podcast. I mean, you're interviewing people, you're getting, information about the Oregon Eagle, about homelessness, from my perspective, direct to your audience.
Right.
And
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's something that's important to me with the Eagle, is that, I like it when an elected official wants to write an article and we print it for them, and it allows them direct access to the readers. And, I think that's unfiltered. And obviously our readers expect us to filter, who does the articles. But at the same time, I just think that too much of local news traditionally has been a reporter that might listen, and then they quote somebody, and then it's mostly their own commentary.
Yes.
And I've noticed it just because on at least one occasion, I've noticed where I've watched a virtual meeting and I get the transcript of it because I want to quote directly from what the person said. And then I read about it in a paper, and it's generally what they said, but it's not word for word. It's in quotation marks. But, we're not lean and mean, but we're definitely lean. So we try to work smart. And part of what I do is to get machine transcriptions of these public meetings. So then I can search for keywords and then find out what exactly did they say. and then quote them appropriately.
As far as that goes, I was watching the Grants Pass City Council meeting on YouTube the other day, talking about the homeless situation. And I saw the public comment, which tended to be angry public people. We're going to get into this more in a minute, but angry people from the public, mostly not wanting a homeless camp in their backyard, and not in my backyard. The NIMBYs, I guess, are called. But mostly it was that. And then I saw a clip from the media, and they made it seem like it was kind of an even 50-50 split of people for and against, just by the way they presented it. And I'm like, wow, they're always kind of tipping the scales. Almost never will they report something in a clean way that just lets you see what actually happened.
Yeah, that's so easy to be done, and especially for, busy reporters that only watch virtually. You don't get the temperature of the room. You don't
Mhm.
feel the heat. And that came out in a number of meetings at the Grants Pass City Council regarding the homeless situation, where you have homeowners that paid top dollar for homes on the Rogue River next to parks, and they can't enjoy the park. They're constantly cleaning up trash. They're even said, I can't even list my home because no realtor will list my home because they know no one will buy it when there's the homeless campgrounds as your
Yes.
next door neighbor.
Yes, exactly. I saw a man talking about that the other day. And just before we move on, I want to just let people know again about your newspaper. Well, it's not just your newspaper. It's a newspaper. You're also on Facebook with it. You've got a Facebook page for that, and also your website. So the OregonEagle.com. And again, how much is it to get it, and what is the breakdown?
Yeah, it's $39 per year, and we publish 6 issues per year, so every other month. And then we also publish lots of other news on the OregonEagle.com website.
Excellent.
So that's what we do, and we really are trying to, in some cases, give the rest of the story that's not being reported locally.
Exactly.
And because we publish every 2 months, I mean, I'm careful. If I have an article written by somebody who, let's just say, is making some assertions against the sheriff, well, I can't print that article and then call it fair that 2 months later he's able to respond. So what I've done is I don't give the article to the sheriff, but I do mention these are the assertions. Do you have any comments in response? And then I put that on the same page of the newspaper so that the reader can read the article as it was written, and then they can read the sheriff's response.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And also, you guys do other things too. You have a lifestyle area there where you talk about different things. You have education, especially for young people. It's rounded too. I like the rounding of it. It shows. I don't know. I just like that. It's not just kind of a hitting you with whatever the flaming stories are, but it lets people think. There's investing in business information in there too. So anyway, I hope people go to your website and get a subscription. It's well worth it. Anybody that wants to see society move forward and continue to be a nice place in Oregon to live, I think ought to be supporting you, in my opinion.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. I really do. And we do add other articles of interest because, we say, more freedom, less government, better living.
Yes.
So you want to ask, there is better living. I mean, that's the end result. We
That's the goal.
children to be better educated. We want more housing opportunities so that, kids that grow up in Oregon can buy a house when they become an adult, things that our parents could take for granted and that, we had to work hard. But up here in Oregon, the limitations on building, it's so extreme that home prices, there's no such thing as a starter home anymore. The builders can't build it because the regulations are so high. And that ties into the homeless situation.
I did. I was going to ask you about some of that, and I was going to get into some of that, like the reasons for that. So let's dig into this homeless situation. I hear people now using activists saying houseless. What is that all about? What are they calling it? Houseless versus homeless?
Well, to generalize, progressives like to control the debate by controlling the language. So when they say a person's homeless, then that's a general term that we all know what that means. And many, just to simplify, progressives, Democrats, believe that the problem is a lack of housing. So that if we just simply have enough, affordable housing, government housing projects, that we need more houses.
Right.
And what we know better than that, I mean, first of all, there are people that are apartmentless. There are people that are studio-less. There are people that, just to say houseless, it's just really it's not an abuse of the English language, but it's unnecessarily complicated to muddy the waters, because the problem for homeless people is much bigger than just simply the lack of housing. Now,
Yes.
if you're a young couple, you both graduate from college, you're making $100,000 a year between the two of you, and the homes are like $500,000, $600,000, then it's like, wow, they have to save up $150,000 for a down payment after tax income. That's a problem with housing.
Yes.
That is a whole separate situation. And then for the homeless people, there are various causes for that. And we can talk about each of those, because it's not a one size fits all situation.
Well, let me just kind of dive into the, one of those elephant in the room situations. How much, in your view, and you've been watching this for a while, how much of the what's called the homeless situation in Oregon is just is a drug abuse problem?
Well, I have the advantage of having served on the Grants Pass Gospel Rescue Mission board for many years, 24 years. And we've seen the homeless population change over time. And drug use among the homeless is up in the 90 percentile range.
Oh, it's that much.
It's very high. And sometimes, it can be, at the Gospel Rescue Mission, we don't allow cigarette smoking, because if you have a 2-pack a day habit, that could be $600 a month. I mean, you're halfway to an apartment.
Yeah.
So the idea that we're trying to help them with addictive behavior, which includes drug and alcohol, we're trying to help them get back into the community. But what we see in Oregon, and especially, in Grants Pass and other cities, large and small, is the large percentage of homeless people living in the parks in cities like Portland, setting tents up on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
It's drug related and mental health related.
Why has that exploded so much in recent years, in your opinion?
Well, in Oregon, for how many years, legalized medical marijuana and then recreational marijuana, and then Measure 110 passed in 2021, which then legalized, or decriminalized rather, hard drugs, narcotics like fentanyl and heroin, cocaine, just mind-boggling drugs that suddenly you would get $100 ticket and be encouraged to call a 1-800 number to find out about drug treatment.
Wow.
So suddenly Oregon became the land of opportunity for people that want to use and abuse drugs of all kinds. And they then began migrating to Oregon. And this affected California in a big way, and also Washington State in a really big way.
Well, didn't California recently, Gavin Newsom, I think, is a horrible governor, but even he recently kind of stopped or did something to curtail the homeless situation there, right? And sending a lot of those people northward.
Yeah, well, it couldn't end up sending them northward. What he did was sign an executive order following the Supreme Court ruling in the Grants Pass homeless class action lawsuit. That took 6 years to get through the courts. But because the Supreme Court ruled in Grants Pass's favor, the cities and states that are in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals could then do something about the homeless encampments. And that's what
Yeah.
he was reacting to.
Okay. So he did something himself, right?
That's right. And in California, some mayors like San Diego, they applauded what he did. And then in Los Angeles, they're like saying, we're not going to shut down the encampments. You know, these people need a place to live.
Right. Yeah. They've pretty much destroyed. I used to live down in LA, and I saw a lot of, I saw when it started to get the people camping on the sidewalks a lot and things like that. And now you'll just go down certain places and see them under the bridges, and you'll just see blocks and blocks of homeless. And I'm sure the same thing is going. I haven't seen Portland in many years, but I'm sure the same thing is going on up there. I see the videos and things like that. I guess before we move on from that, so what has changed? I mean, besides that, obviously we've had a breakdown of the family. We've had a breakdown of law and order over time. You mentioned another thing that's kind of running. Well, we have fentanyl and other things coming over the border. A lot of things at once, which are kind of all thrown together at once. Are these? We also have a Democrat governance here, right? I mean, in Oregon, it's they kind of own the problem, I would say.
I want them to own the problem, but they certainly can take ownership of the bills that passed
Right.
that have made a bad situation much worse, because simultaneously that you have very rigorous land use laws that make it very difficult to build housing out in the counties. You also legalize drugs through Measure 110, and then they pass a law in Salem that makes Oregon a sanctuary state, and then toughened that law just a few years ago so that when there is a drug bust, and not to pick on any one group, but like they're all speaking Spanish, and you talk to the guy in charge, the main man, and you can't ask him, are you a legal citizen of the United States or not? Because in Oregon, you cannot ask that question. And they passed the law that says that if a law enforcement officer does ask about citizenship, that person can sue the police department or sheriff's office for violating their rights, because Oregon's a sanctuary state.
How did that overcome, by the way, the idea of illegal immigration? In other words, this is a federal law we've always had. It is illegal to come into this country just walking in without, properly going through the channels. How does that get superseded by state laws in some cases, right? But on the other hand, good state laws get superseded by federal laws. You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's one of these things, if you're brought up in a family where, like, okay, here are the rules, you have to be home at 11 o'clock on Friday night, and whatever, you have to do your homework, you have to eat your vegetables before dessert, whatever the rules are growing up in your family, that you got to abide by. And then we become adults and we want to abide by the laws and by the rules. What we have is a situation to where states and even the federal government can choose which laws to enforce. So you have selective enforcement. So whereas under the Trump administration, they dramatically reduced the amount of illegal immigration. It was the best that it had been, I think, as long as they've been tracking it.
Yes.
At least for the last 25 years.
Sure.
And then when President Biden took over, not only did they stop building the wall, but basically the ICE officers, the Immigration Control and Enforcement, they suddenly became like social workers to help people fill out the paperwork.
Right. They're facilitating.
They're facilitating. And then you have at the state level here in Oregon, where we just thumb our nose at federal narcotics laws. I mean, cocaine is still, Schedule 1, heroin, and so forth. But, here in Oregon, it's more of a slap on the wrist.
So what happened to, in the old days, my parents were Democrats. they go way back. They went way back to, New Deal, FDR, Democrats. My dad was in the Navy. He flew the flag at all the holidays. Very patriotic. Abortion was not considered in those days, way back when. What happened to, I mean, is there something we can point to, or just a creeping loss of values? What happened to the Democrat Party that used to be, we used to have at least a choice. In the old days, the Republican Party was considered the party of big business or whatever, and then the Democrats were considered the party of the people, the average person, the working person. Where did that go off the rails?
Well, it's definitely come off the rails, and you can see the Republican Party, represented, by Trump and by Vance, that they really appeal to the working class in a way that the Democrats used to.
Right, they used to. Right,
they used to, and even just analyzing how the Democrats went through the long primary process, and President Biden got 14 million votes to be nominated again for their presidential candidate, and that all got tossed out the window because the big donors said, we're not going to fund the next presidential campaign if President Biden is the candidate.
Yeah,
they didn't want to just waste their money.
It's funny that, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, it's definitely flipped. It's definitely flipped. The country as a whole has become more entrepreneurial, and as you get more people starting little businesses, the gig economy and so forth, and all the small businesses, and you start getting hammered by business taxes and by business regulations, you tend to shift from maybe being a Democrat to being a Republican.
Yeah.
Because things have changed, and in the political parties. I mean, President, John F. Kennedy, he was the one that cut the top tax rate from 93% to 70%. And then Reagan cut it from 70% to 50%. And then it's come down to where it's right now, roughly 38%. So it's definitely changed. Some of it has to do with the Vietnam War. That really changed a lot. You had a lot of people that didn't want to get drafted. They go to college, they get a PhD. Suddenly they're teaching the next generation of students. And, they're not union workers. The unions have been really devastated by the 1965 Immigration Act that allowed tons of immigrants to come in and undercut union wages. So, that's had an impact over time to where private sector unions are far weaker than they used to be, while public sector unions are far stronger than they used to be. So
it's interesting. It seems like we've got more and more of a divergence too of where the people seem to want to go versus where the people in charge want to take. There's no longer a idea of for the people, you are elected and you're representing the people. I don't see any representation of the actual people anymore. There are, whoever they are, there are elite people, as because you're in the newspaper business, there's only so many corporations controlling all of the news that we get, or vast amount of the news that we get. That's a very scary thing. And it just seems like we're going more and more into a you do as you're told kind of society. It seems very scary to me.
Yeah, it should concern us because, our economy depends upon workers that can read, write, do mathematics. I mean, one of the reasons why the Eagle, focuses on education is that we're doing our students a grave disservice by allowing them to graduate with a high school diploma, but not have the ability to read and write and communicate, through public speaking and so forth. That by handing them that diploma, but not having academic standards like there used to be, it gives them a false feeling of success, and then they get out in the real world.
There's like an illusion of education that we have now, especially among younger people. Younger people are so smart and so able to get so much information off the internet that in some ways they have a lot more information than we had growing up. But it's a lot of the education that we got that kind of very central to educating a person, in my opinion, has been kind of left behind. So the amount of education is huge, but the quality of what is being educated or the values being inculcated into young people has really suffered.
It's really suffered. And I just, share a personal experience. I mean, when I was in eighth grade, in eighth grade English, we were taught Greek roots. And we all knew that when we got to ninth grade, we would study Latin roots because, Latin's 53% of the English language.
Mm.
Well, sometime between, the summer before my ninth grade, they decided, they don't need to learn Latin roots anymore.
Mm.
And that to me is an example of dumbing down the education.
Yes.
And even when before that, we didn't learn to diagram sentences. They didn't necessarily teach the rules of grammar. I mean, I remember these moments where I think it was in eighth grade where the teacher just offhandedly said that adverbs modify verbs like adjectives modify nouns. And I sat back saying, why didn't they tell me this 5 years ago? It's a very simple rule.
Yeah.
And it's like, why they're not making my life better. And here in Oregon, just in the last couple of years, has our new governor begun to focus on literacy because for whatever reason, the way reading is taught in Oregon public schools depends largely on where the teacher went to school and which professor they were taught when they're getting their degree in education, taught them how to teach reading. So it could be anywhere from phonics, where you learn the sounds of the English language and you can sound out any word once you learn how. You may not know what it means, but you can sound it out and figure it out.
Right.
Versus the look-say method, where you have a picture of an apple and you have the word apple underneath it, and that's how you learn to read the word apple. Now, maybe they've updated that so they have a picture of an iPhone that in the Apple logo,
Apple
that's an
iPhone.
apple.
Yeah,
And you have the word
that's
apple underneath the Apple logo so that
make it relatable.
Make it relatable. But it's really, and that goes, again, it goes back a long way. I mean, you can talk 100 years ago where the idea that education was something that at that time, the Industrial Revolution, they wanted more worker bees, and you wanted people smart enough to be able to put the fender on the back of the Model T Ford, but not independent thinking, so that they would be going to business for themselves and think for themselves. And because it's just like today, someone that graduates from college with college debt, and then somehow, they get a good job, and then they buy a car with a loan and a house with a big loan, and suddenly they're indebted up to their eyeballs. It's really hard for them to get involved in the local community because they're working all the time just to pay their bills, their taxes, and their debt payments.
Well, isn't that part of the point, though, from a overlord's perspective? Keep them busy, keep them in a position where they don't feel comfortable. They don't have the means to, monetarily or otherwise, to kind of mount an effective opposition. They don't have the time because you're wearing them out. It seems like that's just part of the plan.
Yeah, and whether it's been self-consciously planned out, but they definitely have not. Well, I would just say, part of the things, like if you go around the sun enough times, you pay attention, then you just learn certain things. When I was back in junior high school, we had metal shop, plastics.
Right.
We did all that. We were looking to work with our hands in high school. I took basic auto shop. Now, you were not going to ask me to rebuild your car engine, but I learned how to change the oil in a car. I mean, they
do the basics.
They do the basics. They had home ec classes where people could learn to cook and do the laundry and so on and so forth. Now they get free breakfast, free lunch, and they don't even have to learn how to cook. Their parents don't have to cook. I mean, it's sort of like we're dumbing down everything. I just,
and yet raising the self-esteem of dumbed down people. Like a
that's
very
right.
dangerous combination, you know?
It's a
Uh,
really dangerous combination, and I'm concerned for that we're raising a generation of teenagers that can't get summer jobs because the minimum wage is so high and
right.
their skill set is so low. But everybody starts with a low skill set. But in the old days, you might hire them at $12 an hour, and if they do a good job, then a couple months later, you give them $1 raise, and then 3 or 4 months later, you give them a couple dollars, and then they're at 15, and they're like, wow, if I work hard, I show up when I'm supposed to, I treat the customers right, I do what my boss tells me to do, even when I don't feel like doing it. I leave my phone in my car.
Yeah,
I don't have it, holding it all the time, then I get paid more money. But if you
yeah.
start them out at $15 an hour, and it's like, I'll just go on to the next job.
And there's nowhere to go from there. There's nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go. And so we're doing them a real disservice. And then at the other spectrum, it's just the toleration and just acceptance of the drug abuse,
Yes.
on the streets
Yes.
and in the parks is just appalling. I mean,
And I want to drill down and get to a lot of the specifics here, right, Grants Pass. But you know what? I'm glad that we talked about this because really everything you're talking about, education related and all that, it all relates to the drug problem itself, right? I mean, you're creating individuals who are deep down know they're missing something, and they're trying to fill some type of void, or they're just so angry about life and things like that, and they haven't gotten the proper maybe religious training or what is important in life, and everything just enrages them. You're going to have a drug problem. So these are really a lot of the issues that are causing this to begin with. So I'm actually glad that we went in this direction. I do want to go into specifically the situation in Grants Pass. So I guess we've already talked a little bit about how this kind of began, right? Where it kind of came from. And then at some point the left-wing government, made it difficult and then passed the drug law. I guess the last worst thing that they've done was pass the law that decriminalized hard drugs, right? Which they have now changed. It's in process of being changed back to some degree, right?
Yes, and just to correct that one point was that Measure 110 was passed by the voters. It was put on the ballot with money from, through George Soros and the Drug Policy Institute of New York, where Oregon could be a test bed for legalizing hard drugs. Because we're a state with 4.3 million people. We have 10% of the population of California. So it takes a lot less money to pay people to get the signatures to put it on the ballot. And then it's heavily marketed as a way like, this is compassion. We're going to give them treatment rather than lock them up in jail. So that is how it was sold to the voters.
Right.
And then here in Grants Pass, we had a class action lawsuit filed in 2018 using 3 homeless people to represent all homeless in Grants Pass. And, they had an attorney that would take up the case. And that case just took its way through the court. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against Grants Pass. And then we appealed it again to the full Ninth Circuit. And that was rejected. And then the city appealed to the United States Supreme Court and prevailed. Now, that all happened over a 6-year period.
6-year period. And so that was basically saying it had to do with public camping, right? Wasn't that the main issue of it, that Grants Pass was saying, we had the right to not let you be in the parks and take over our parks. And was that the issue itself, or was there more to it than that?
Well, there's more to it. There was the Boise decision, which by the Ninth Circuit, that said you can't criminalize, sleeping in the parks and all of that. And then in Grants Pass, they went further and ruled that if you don't have enough shelter beds that equal or exceed the number of homeless, then you can't enforce the anti-camping ordinances. And so in Grants Pass situation, a nonprofit annually does a point in time count where they go around and count all the homeless people, and they can count somebody if a son gets in an argument with his parents, storms out of the house and spends the night on grandpa's couch, he would be counted as homeless for that point in time. The Grants Pass Gospel Rescue Mission was specifically not counted by the Ninth Circuit because at the mission, we have rules where they can't be on drugs or alcohol. And we do have daily chapel services. They don't have to get baptized or get converted. We're trying to help them to live a better life and to get to those root problems that you alluded to before, where there is something missing in their life. And that because people lose their job all the time. A mill closes, you get laid off. But for most people, you don't become homeless when you lose your job. You go on unemployment, you go find another job. But for homeless people, that's an aspect of it. But it's also because they don't have the people skills, they're addicted to drugs, or they're on and off, they're unreliable employees. And so the Ninth Circuit wouldn't allow the Gospel Rescue Mission to count, and that decision by the Ninth Circuit affected California, Washington, Hawaii, all these states in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I think it's 14 states, but it's a lot. And that's why it got so bad in Los Angeles, because if they have 27,000 homeless people and they only have 26,999 shelter beds, then they can't enforce anti-camping in the public spaces.
That is really crazy. So now the Supreme Court threw that out, reversed that, right?
That's right, at
Recently?
the end of June.
Okay. By the way, we hear about low barrier places to go and versus high barrier, I believe you call them. And the mission would be considered a high barrier because you actually have to have a certain amount of, you have to act a certain way and do things a certain way and not use drugs to stay there. A low barrier shelter would be anybody can just kind of go in, even if they're on drugs, no problem. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. So when you think about at a city park, like in Grants Pass, Riverside Park, is that a homeless person could come in and set up their tent, and then the city was restricted on what it could do as far as asking them to leave. Oregon passed a law that said you had to give them 72-hour notice, so suddenly they could stay 3 days, and then if the cop came by, the community resource officer might come by after 4 or 5 days and say, "Hey, you got to move out." They'd move to the next park.
Yeah. The average person, I believe, the average citizen, obviously is fed up with the homeless, quote unquote, homeless situation, but they're really fed up with the drug abuse of it. I think the average person really doesn't care that much if you had a homeless person and they want to sleep in a park or something, as long as people clean up after themselves, treat others with respect, don't bother other people. Who really cares that much? I think, and there are people who, for whatever reason, may find themselves in situations. And I think the average person would say, hey, I'm going to give a little leeway to that. But I don't understand how it's become such an abusive situation that people even take that. In other words, to me, the parks are paid for. Well, they are. The reality is the parks are paid for by the taxpayers of a given area. And those parks should be there for the taxpayers' purposes and for kids to play and for baseball and soccer and what have you. That's kind of an obvious thing. To have it taken over by people who don't show a total lack of respect for their environment or the people around them and allow that to go on, it just boggles my mind. And it boggles my mind that there are people, especially in Salem and Portland, who are okay with this. I just find that to be such a bizarre way of looking at life.
It is bizarre because I try to apply this all throughout my life, but treat others the way you wish to be treated.
Sure.
If I had a drug addicted son or daughter, I would not want them to be treated the way many nonprofits treat them, in the name of harm reduction and in the name of compassion, giving them clean needles, giving them pieces of foil so they can smoke their fentanyl.
That is crazy.
Giving them Narcan. I mean, we used to think as first responders, being police and fire. Now it's the drug addict whose buddy is going to get his injection or smoke his fentanyl, and they're standing there with Narcan so that if they OD, they can be brought literally back to life by the other fellow drug addict. And it's just horrendous.
Well, if you want to do that, if you believe in giving clean needles to junkies and things like that, to me, if you want to do that, I mean, it's illegal, but let's say, kind of go do it away from me, but don't make me pay for it. Don't comply, make me pay for giving clean needles and letting people continue their drug. It's just so insane. All right, let's get back. Let's get to where we're at now in Grants Pass. So a couple nights ago, they had a meeting, and they're getting a lot of people, obviously ticked off to come to the meetings and putting pressure on them to do something, because now they have the Supreme Court on their side. They've made a ruling that says, hey, now you can come down on this public camping. Let's clean up our parks. And it appears that the people in charge, which always seems the way it is, the people in charge seem to have a different opinion than the average people that they're supposed to be representing. The people in charge of the city council and mayor of Grants Pass seem to have a different idea. They seem to want to drag their feet, first of all. I've gotten that impression. Is that impression that you have?
I would say yes, and to some degree, it's been justified in that the city of Grants Pass remains under a federal injunction. That the city of Grants Pass, its attorneys, worked out a deal with the Ninth Circuit, and they signed a federal injunction that allowed the homeless to sleep and camp in all Grants Pass parks, except for what for a long time was known as All Sports Park. And that's a big park with all the different sporting fields. Sure. And they thought, look, this is a regional park anywhere but here. And what's happened is that, little leagues have had practices. They had one example where someone literally overdosed and died while a game was going on or practice. And they literally had to have a human shield of adults to try to block it so they could bring in the body bag, get the body into the bag, and then carry it out without the players seeing it.
Ooh.
And they're volunteers that show up before the practices and the games to walk the fields and picking up the needles so that the players don't step on one or fall on it. And so that's the downside of, again, well-meaning, in my opinion, misguided nonprofits that hand out the needles, but they don't take any responsibility for what ends up happening, because it ends up not being a needle exchange, because they just use the needles and just leave them in the restrooms, just leave them on the ground. And
I mean, they know that. They have to know that a person that irresponsible with their own life, the way they're living already, is not going to be responsible with how they responsibly use drug. Kind of a funny statement anyway, but they're not going to use responsibly. That brings up another thing. The mayor of this city, Sarah Bristol, I believe her name is Sarah Bristol. She is on the board of a number of these nonprofits, I was told, that are encouraging a lot of this behavior. Is that not an obvious conflict of interest for a mayor of the city?
Well, first of all, she's a volunteer mayor. She doesn't get paid. And she is on the board at UCAN. It's UCANN. And they do get 90% of their money from the taxpayers. And I think 10% of that nonprofit is money that's given voluntarily by people. Mm-hmm. And I contrast that with the Gospel Rescue Mission, where for over 40 years, 100% of our money has come from voluntary donations. We don't accept any taxpayer money. And
Good.
if we don't help the situation, then our donors will stop donating.
Yeah.
They do benefit from, to some extent, that the more homeless people there are, the more federal money they get.
Right.
So they do have an incentive to
Incentive.
maximize the count.
Right.
And that's the reality of it. And
I'm going to say that's, I don't, even if she is a volunteer, to me, that's a direct conflict of interest. I mean, personally, I don't know the depth of it, but just on the face of what you're telling me. But anyway, so now at the meeting a couple nights ago, they have said, okay, we're going to, the idea is to get the homeless out of the parks and into, I think, 4 facilities that they've come up with. One of them was water treatment center, right, in Grants Pass, and then the 3 other places. What do you make of that as a step right now?
Yeah, well, it's a result of and reaction to 2 things. One, of course, is the Supreme Court ruling that says that having these park restrictions is not cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, that's how it was characterized and ruled on by the Ninth Circuit, that, kicking somebody out of the park after a day or 3 days is cruel and unusual punishment. So that got thrown out. It's also a reaction to pressure by the public over the last 4 or 5 years that says that we don't want these drug addicts in our parks. And some have mental conditions that are a result of using drugs. Other people use drugs because they have a mental situation, mental health challenge. But in any event, that's not the place to have them treated. So they voted last week to remove them from the parks and give them 4 different locations on city-owned property that would have porta potties and so forth, so that they would go there, and rather than the parks. There's part of Riverside Park. So one small part of Riverside Park that currently is being used, I think half of that will continue to be used, but the rest of it are on city-owned property.
So does this look like a step in the right direction from your point of view, or does it look like a way to kind of continue an endless cycle of camps for homeless drug addicts in the city of Grants Pass?
It's too soon to tell. There's been a major push by, let's say, half the city council to create city-run homeless campgrounds and navigation centers and so forth while this lawsuit's been going on. And largely, someone would propose a field to put it, and the public would rise up and say, don't bring them into my area, and it would go down. And this is going to cost $250,000 a year, and the city, does struggle to have enough money for police and fire and the essential services that the taxpayers want, along with parks that families can enjoy. But this is definitely a big step in the right direction, because it gets the homeless individuals out of the parks, and then they have some place to go. And then at that place, they can have treatment, or the nonprofits can approach them there. But it does help the people of Grants Pass to get their parks back. And then it really helps the police, because there are fewer locations that they have to patrol. So all in all, it's a good step. It was passed 7-0. One counselor was absent. So I like to see the unanimity at the council level. They're all rowing in the same direction. They all want to do what the public wants, and at the same time, provide a place for homeless individuals to stay.
Okay. There's going to be a big piece of this coming up the beginning of September, September 1, which has to do with repealing, well, the idea that that people could use hard drugs with very little problem in Oregon has been repealed, and they already repealed that, but they gave them a certain time amount, which ends up kicking in September 1, where you can no longer use hard drugs without penalty, right?
It's true, yet the penalty is it's not enough. They didn't bring it back to the way it was before Measure 110 passed. They added like if you have a misdemeanor A, B, C, D, E, I mean, this is like, I don't know, F or something. It's down the list. It's a step in the right direction, but it's by no means a return to the way it used to be. And frankly, I don't like the idea of somebody that uses hard drugs to be sent to prison for 5 years, because the taxpayers have to pay for that, and it's not good for the person. But the idea of using drugs openly in the parks, on the sidewalks, downtown, this has got to change. And the police chief of Grants Pass, I mean, he told me after a previous council meeting approximately a month ago that, come September 1, they're really going to start enforcing what they can enforce, and we will see something get better.
Right. And his quote, and that's Warren Hensman you're talking about. Is that right? And they also call him the public safety director, because he's at those meetings, the city council meetings. So he said, almost a verbatim quote here, because he was talking the other night about this: people will be arrested for possession of controlled substances as of September 1. From what I can see, something needs to be done in a direction. I don't want to see people, getting throw away the key on people who just have some drug issues. But if you're dealing drugs, I think that's a whole nother issue than just using drugs, because you're just spreading out a problem. And if something isn't done, they're going to have more and more people, and the problem is going to spread, and already has spread beyond just the parks, spread into neighborhoods and all sorts of things. So if people are allowed to just kind of get away with just being high and especially dealing drugs, it's a bad outcome. So they have to do something to, I guess, scare these dealers into moving up the road moving up the road to somewhere where I guess they can get away with this kind of thing, maybe Portland or something.
Yeah. And I in fact, Chief Hensman did say at the meeting I attended a month ago that since the Supreme Court ruling came down, that the number of tents in the parks had already gone down. And I don't know if the homeless drug addicts read the Oregon Eagle or not, but word gets around. And, and just like Oregon and California was seen as a soft touch, and it was the place to go to do
Absolutely.
Drugs,
absolutely.
News travels fast on the streets, and maybe they are moving on to greener pastures.
Yeah. And I think Medford had been pretty tough in comparison to Grants Pass. And they didn't have as big, if I am understanding that right, didn't have as big of a homeless drug issue as we have here. I don't know.
Well, they didn't. And for two main reasons. One, they weren't under a federal injunction.
Yeah.
So, and they spent approximately $3 million on homeless services that helped to get the homeless people, off the Greenway,
right.
The Bear Camp Greenway and so forth. So they're spending money, and time will tell if that's going to help long term, or if they're going to be able to afford it long term. But the pendulum has definitely swung from the direction of enabling the drug use and drug abuse to looking down on it and pushing back on it, because it is affecting everybody. It is affecting people in their neighborhoods and in their parks, and they're taking the grandkids to the park. I mean, these are just basic
things.
Issues. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also affects city council people. I heard one of the city council guys saying, "Hey, I live right down the street from some of this stuff, and I think one of the areas they're going to put in is right next to, even closer to them." So if the people in charge are feeling the same pain that we do in general, that's a good thing in a sense, because I think that gets them moving quicker. One last question about the meeting. I just wanted to get a clarity on this because I didn't understand what it meant. They passed a couple of measures 7-0. One of them had to do with camping in the parks, criminal trespass on city property. Are they now saying that that is not a criminal trespass anymore, or are they putting something back in to make it tougher, or are they making it easier? I wasn't clear what they were doing there.
Well, what they are doing is, giving the police, more tools in their toolbox, because to be able to approach them and then trespass them. See, the way it's been is they might say to, homeless Henry, to say, in 3 days, you need to move on. And then 4 or 5 days later, Henry's still there. They tell him to move on. He goes to the next park. Well, now there's only going to be 4 locations, and time will tell if they need all 4. Maybe that'll be changed to 3.
Okay. So criminal trespass means they're reinstituting a criminal trespass situation instead of slap on the wrist for the city parks.
Yeah, or a meaningless slap on the wrist, because a person would have to stay more than 3 days. If they had, the ordinance said that they could have an 8-foot by 8-foot tarp with a tent on it. That's all the space they got. And if they had more than that, and if they got trespassed, then they could be excluded from that one park for 30 days. And if they're just tightening it up.
Yeah, tightening it up a little bit.
Tightening it up and narrowing where they can go. And it's a balancing act for them, but they're definitely moving in the right direction, and they just need to keep on going in this direction to provide the police with the resources they need. They need to keep the gentle pressure on the district attorney to prosecute those that are arrested.
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
Because without the district attorney doing his job, the police and the arrest
doesn't mean anything, does it?
Doesn't really mean very much. No.
Yeah. And, one of the councilmen said, interestingly, they're talking about monitoring what's going on. And then he said at the end of his statement, and we've got at least 50 monitors in this room, meaning the city council chamber. And I really like that, because that's what it really comes down to. You have to, the people themselves are the government in a sense. These people are our representatives, but we are in charge. And if we are there, going to city council meetings, going to different things, showing up, it makes a huge difference. And you can see it in the room where you hear some of the people talking. You can't get away with things when you have people in the room who are going to call you out on it. So I would just encourage people to keep doing that. And we covered a lot today, Richard, and I thank you for all that. Really gave our viewers a much better idea of what's going on right now. We could get into solutions and drill down a lot more. Maybe sometime we can do that. I know you're on the board, you said, of the Grants Pass Gospel Rescue Mission, which from what I can see is doing great service. And I know that they are out there. And I think they said that they have a success rate of getting people in 30 days, like a third of the people they're able to get out there after 30 days in their program into jobs and actually get them off drugs. Am I right in hearing that?
It depends how long they're at the mission.
Okay.
We have a pathway that we invite them to join. It's all voluntary. They volunteer into the program. But yeah, 1 out of 3, if they stay with the program, and they might be there 6 months, they might be a year, but they graduate with a place to live and a job. And
that is really cool.
And money in the bank. We help them with their budgeting. So if they lose their job, they won't lose their house, because they have several months of rent in the bank as a rainy day fund. And we really help them in that regard.
I love that. I'd like to somehow drill down on that in the future, because the solution to what it's all about. What is that website, by the way?
Yeah, grantspassmission.org.
grantspassmission.org. And that's for people that really want help. This is not for the people that want to keep using drugs and, not serious about their lives. They don't really want to work. That's a whole nother issue. The Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat. And that sounds harsh, but in reality, I think we'd be a lot better off if people actually worked for their food and for their sustenance. So grantspassmission.org, that's great. And you're on the board there. For more information on what you're doing is the Oregon Eagle, OregonEagle.com. And I think that everybody should subscribe to this newspaper and get it delivered to your door. And also, if you subscribe, you also get access to a private chat, right, as part of your website as well.
Richard. Yep, and they can read all the back issues as well.
Yeah,
so they can.
Great.
Yeah.
Great stuff there.
Yep.
Richard, it's been a real pleasure and honor to have you. I wish you well with what you're doing at the Eagle and what you're doing at the rescue mission. They're both super important. I'm glad that you decided to not only do it, but do it successfully and do it in the long term. That makes all the difference that you're still there. So God bless you, and thanks for doing what you're doing.
Yep, you're very welcome. Glad to be of service. Have a great day.
You too. Take care. Richard Emmons, publisher and editor of the Oregon Eagle, and doing great work. And I'm really glad to be able to be interviewing people like this on this podcast. So to give you an idea of what's going on in the communities, and more importantly, what you can do, how you can be a better citizen. We need people to step up today more than ever. So I hope that you guys are on board with me. If you're not, I guess keep moseying down the road. But if you are, let's work together. Let's do something to have a better society. oldschoolus.com, natural health, success, and freedom. You got to be healthy. If you're not healthy, you can't do anything. We need health. We need spiritual health, mental health, physical health. And that's number one. Success. We need to be successful. Richard Emmons is an example of a guy who's successful doing what he's doing. He's doing it in a serious way. He's not throwing rocks from the sidelines and not accomplishing anything. He's actually in the arena, the man in the arena, doing the work that needs to be done. Critics are a dime a dozen, but Richard is doing the work that needs to be done. Natural health, success, and freedom. Obviously, freedom. Without freedom, you have no society whatsoever. So if you need to get in touch with me, info@oldschoolus.com, info@oldschoolus.com. Thank you for being with me today. And look, if you have any ideas for shows and things like that, let me know. And we got to keep going down the road and doing it right. Somebody has to step up for this country and for this republic and do the right thing. So thanks for Richard, and thanks for people out there like the Grants Pass Rescue Mission that are doing good work. And we're ready to roll. So I will see you on the next show. Take care of yourselves.